showing a driver's side running board on this because the passenger side was kind of the prototype, the driver's side, the final variant. And somebody had just asked a question in one of the other videos, very good question. What does this do about your ground clearance, and would I plan on putting a lift on the vehicle to make up for any loss of ground clearance from the running boards? And that's because in a lot of 4x4s, the running boards actually stick down lower than the frame. They'll be like a little zigzag extension, that sort of a thing. For example, on full-size trucks and SUVs and a lot of your Chevy Suburban type stuff, those running boards are decorative, or at the most are to act as a step when somebody's climbing in and out of the vehicle. This particular rig is not very high off the ground, and that had to do with some of the design changes that went back and forth with Isuzu corporate and some stuff going on between them and Consumer Reports back in the 1980s. So these were not really all that high off the ground, and it was pretty common for them to get a 2-inch suspension lift, less common to get what was called a body lift. And by combining a body lift and a suspension lift, people would do these as a modified off-road vehicle, especially in the Australian market. The Australians, just because of the nature of the way the place is laid out, tend to be on the cutting edge of a lot of off-road travel type modifications and upgrades on vehicles, not necessarily the southwestern U.S. or southeastern U.S. mud bogger type stuff, redneck rampage, mud bogging type riding. So in the lift, what you would be looking at on a suspension lift, on a basic 2-inch suspension lift, this vehicle was made in such a way that you could actually do that with no added parts from an aftermarket company, because it used a torsion bar front suspension. So, sorry about that. Okay, so right here, you're going to see a bolt, a big bolt. And what that does is that will help you adjust the lift on the front torsion bar. What it is a big, thick steel bar. You'll see it's kind of a darker, cleaner black. That's because it's spring steel. And it didn't corrode or pick up stuff the same way the other stuff does. It's a higher grade of spring steel that runs forward and backward. It's on kind of a splined mount right there where you'll see that circle. This bolt actually controls a lever going to it. So by tightening or loosening the bolt, you can raise or lower the front end on a range of movement by about 2 inches. And so this one got maxed out by the previous owner, who had a little bit, actually had tires on here that were a little bit smaller than what's here now, and I'll show you some of what the effect of that was. So that was how you would lift the front end on an Isuzu Trooper. But when you got one of these from the dealership, that bolt was turned back all the way to lower the front end. So you could actually raise the front end on these simply by turning the bolt. On the back, there would be, it's a spring, a conventional leaf spring arrangement. And there was a shackle, a replacement spring shackle that you could get for about, you could get a set of them for about 40 bucks. That would give you the other 2 inches of lift for the rear. So when somebody would lift this vehicle, give it a 2-inch lift, they were basically putting, they were making an adjustment on that bolt at the front, and then they were replacing this rear spring shackle with one that basically had a spacer in it. And that was how you would lift the vehicle. Now, there would be special editions that were sold in the U.S. that would have that already installed. But basically, that was the difference. Let's say when the frame was shared with a two-wheel drive truck or something, that was the difference right there. That was how you would get the additional 2 inches. The other way somebody would gain a lift on this is they would unbolt, try to find a few where you can see them from the camera. There's one right there. they would unbolt all the points where the body's attached to the frame, put another spacer in there, and then use longer bolts to attach the body to the frame again. Because this is not a unibody vehicle. It's actually built on a same or very similar frame as their Isuzu pickup trucks. So, in a unibody vehicle, you don't necessarily have a frame that sticks down. On this, it turned out that the frame from the factory, the way this thing came, the difference between, let's say, the four-wheel drive Troopers and the two-wheel drive pickups that utilize a lot of the same manufacturing stuff. One of the reasons they look so different was because the pickup and the Trooper used entirely different bodies. When you purchase maintenance manuals for the two, though, mechanically they were very similar. So you ended up with about an inch of exposed frame under the body. What I did on this is I used an inch and a quarter, inch and a half. I think I used inch and a quarter square tube on these. And so what happens when I welded them on parallel to the frame, I gotta crawl under here with the camera again, you'll see that the running board extensions don't stick down any further than the frame except by that little quarter inch. Same on both sides. You'll also see that there's a fair amount of armor plating under here. That was all factory standard stuff that was for off-road armor plate. You know, in case you hit rocks or brush or stuff underneath, it won't destroy components on the bottom of the vehicle. So with this running board design, you'll notice that parts of it aren't welded. That's because I didn't have a lift. If I ever get this thing up on a lift. So here's what's going on. You could see that they only stick down a fraction of an inch lower than the frame. Everything else was built on top. Okay, it was built above the running board because I'm taking advantage of this 3-inch clearance that I have between the running board and the bottom of the door. And the other thing I did to stabilize it, because that's not the most stable attachment we could come up with, but it was fast. It was fast to put together. I did some work on some frame reinforcements on a guy's Toyota a couple years back and found how they had kind of a big L-shaped pan plate that would go on each mounting point, but they were using tubular steel, and it was, I believe, only 4 mounting points per side for the frame reinforcements, and then that was like a big rock guard type of thing. On this one, another thing that I did, because on this particular build I was using a MIG welder. In MIG welders, you can do some of the stuff with your, you know, like attaching thick steel to thin steel. You can do finer adjustments on a welder. I actually welded that to the bottom of the body. When I did that with a flux core welder on the other side at first, all those welds popped off. When I did it with a MIG welder, they stayed. And so I went back on the passenger side, redid them with a MIG welder, and they stayed. So for this thing to get removed, it saws all the time. This is not super thick sheet metal here. But the thing is, I needed, because I was using a type of attachment that maybe doesn't have the best leverage in the world, I needed additional attachment points other than just on the frame. So I attached that to the body. Now that would prevent me from doing a body lift later on, but I'm not trying to make this a tall truck. I still want you know, good off-road capability, but I want to maintain on-road stability, and I don't want to raise the center of gravity all that badly. And so that's kind of how this design works. The bottom is actually still more or less even with the bottom of the frame there. And that also gives me enough strength that people can stand on it. But the secret to getting that extra strength is these extra welds that are along the bottom of the sheet metal. You normally probably wouldn't do that on a high-value vehicle or something you're trying to preserve a lot of value on. But this is not a high-value vehicle. This is a cheapo rig that's getting fixed up to be highly functional. And that's what I'm accomplishing with this project. This is basically how to get a really good, capable bug-out type vehicle, a very functional, the Swiss Army knife of 4x4s, for under $5,000 total build cost.